So I'm here with Jackie Brown, who I've known for my entire career.
Really long time.
And you are our Chief Operating Officer. You're my right arm, but you're the COO of the Maryland Association of CPAs. But before that, you've done just about every job in the association in your career here, because you started when you were 3.
That's right.
But no, so some of the functions that you've been involved in, tell me about those, just some quick background.
Okay, so public relations is how I started. Public relations assistant. We had an agency that did a lot of the work, so I was hired as the assistant. And then got rid of the agency, so did PR for a while, membership development, continuing professional education, and then started sort of in that firm management role. I guess you'd compare it to a firm, but then COO.
Right.
So I've had a great career and learned a ton and wouldn't trade it for the world.
Well, and I'm certainly glad of that. So I remember vividly, and one of my colleagues was reminding me of this, when we first, well, not when we first met, after we met for years, but I was on the executive committee as a treasurer. And I remember one of the first things I was doing as treasurer, looking at the financials, was analyzing CPE, continuing professional education. Remember those days?
Yeah.
And you and I presented at a big state society AICPA national CPE conference in Boston, right? Yeah. And so it struck me that I really didn't know much about how the profession did that until that experience with you, right? Remember that?
I do.
And so that was that was probably, God, it must have been like 94 or something, I'd hate to say, but it had to be at least back in that area.
I can't do the math that quick.
But, so how has learning, CPE, changed from then to now?
Oh gosh, in fundamental ways, but I think that's just the beginning. I think what we've seen since then has just been the very beginning. I think the tsunami you use a lot of times as a metaphor, the tsunami of change in learning is just about to hit us. So, we started doing online learning 10 years ago, and develop, and now we're talking about nano-learning and 10-minute learning. But it's not just the online, and it's not just the way it's being delivered in using technology, but it's the fundamental shift from compliance, from check the box, it's CPE, get your CPE credit, to really learning. I think that's what's really different from that. Get the CPE to develop your competencies, and that's what what you as an individual to develop your career, and what your organization, your firm, or your company is going to need is to develop competency, not just get your CPE.
So it's funny you hit. So we talk about the shift change, which is this is part of that conversation. We've seen what I call the 5 fundamental shifts, but leadership, learning, technology, workplace, and generations. And learning touches on all of those, I think. They kind of all interplay with each other, it seems. But so tell us about that. I mean, because you're talking about this learning, so why is learning changing? So why is this tsunami getting ready to happen? What would you say from that standpoint? What's driving that?
What's driving that is the talent development. The biggest thing we hear from firms and companies, I remember firms and companies all the time, is talent development. It's the #1 way you can recruit and retain the best talent. It's also the pace of change. For any CPA at any point in their career, the pace of change is amplified. Just think about your own career and what you had to know when you started. And now, young professionals taking the exam for the first time, as soon as they finish that exam, it's all new information. It's that kind of pace is what's going to create the need for continuous learning.
It's funny because I know we obviously in our town halls get to talk to a lot of folks about this stuff, and the one story that I love that really made me take notice was in Western Maryland, and we were talking about new standards. And I think at that point I was showing them the graph of the new GAP standards, right? So we had GAP, then you had this new FIRF-SME, financial reporting framework for small and medium enterprises. Then you had GAP private company, the private company initiative. So 2 new sets of standards, plus the old original GAP. Then you had IFRS and IFRS-SME. So 5 sets of standards, right? And then you can add on to that GASB, and then you can add to it the FASAB at the federal level. So 7 sets of financial reporting standards. And when I went to school, it was 2 or 3 at the most. And so this young lady in the front, who is a recent grad from Frostburg, and I was watching her, and her eyes got like wide open, like, oh my God, what are you talking about? And so I stopped and I asked her what she was thinking. She goes, you mean that like those other 2 sets of standards have happened since I graduated last May? And I'm like, yeah, they have. And that's just like, I think that highlights this pace of change, right? I mean, that's what's, so literally you can finish your degree and when I took the degree, ancient times, I had, I could use that knowledge for probably 15, 20 years before it changed at all. Now, they're lucky if they can get 2 years out of their knowledge base before they have to learn stuff all over again. And that was just, I think that was a kind of a big one. So, one of the things that I want to talk to you about is you serve, the AICPA, I think, did an admirable job of saying, learning's changing, we need to get ahead of it. So you were appointed as one of a few of the state society leadership to be on this special task force called the Future of Learning. So tell me about that project, like who was on it, what you did, and what some of the insights that you got from that experience. And then we'll kind of bring it back down to kind of how we're dealing with it in Maryland. Sure.
So it was an amazing experience. I was really privileged to be a part of it. The group was made up very diverse. We had CPAs in higher education. We had big managing partners of firms, small firms, big corporates, small business. We had a really diverse group, and then state society representatives. So that was really, really important piece of the work to have that diversity of thought in there. But it was created because it's critical for just as the story you told was just a perfect setup for why this work was so important, because the future of the profession depends on it. You have to be able to keep up. You have to be able to adapt and innovate, and so the whole purpose of the task force was to create a case for change. We have to get the profession's attention that something not is changing, it has changed. It has changed, and how are you going to deal with it? So I loved the way the AICPA structured the work. We actually went outside the profession, which our own futurist Dan Burris would say is what you should be doing. So we started the task force work actually on the campus of Harvard, and we learned from higher ed experts there how university setting, higher ed learning is training. So we can know now what to expect from the next generation of CPAs that are coming out. So that was just a really cool experience to be there and sort of think of it that way. And then they totally flipped. Our next trip was to Deloitte University in Texas. So we got to hear then from higher ed to how are the biggest firms and companies, Deloitte being sort of the model, handling developing their talent. And Deloitte, of course, is way ahead of that curve, but this is how it's happening. And so it was really cool to be at Deloitte University and see all the, not just technology, but the rooms they had set up and the way they engaged and facilitated and created collaborative learning spaces for their new hires, and not just their new hires, how they develop their talent. And then our last meeting was actually in Silicon Valley, so we heard from the techies of techies what to expect and what we're seeing now in the way they're adding gamification and badging and just all the technical elements of learning that are really making it much more effective in how they develop learning. So it was a really amazing experience and created a whole case for change that we're desperately trying to get the profession to pay attention to, but also adapting to our own learning, integrating into the way we're doing it. We were one of the first states to have Nano-Learning, pass it with the Maryland State Board and with NASVA's help. And so just those micro-learning was something we heard about a year ago, and we have now in Maryland. So again, the pace of how we have to adapt our learning is changing too.
Yeah. So what do you think that means to CPAs? So what?
So what? So I think what it means to CPAs, and I, love this profession, worked in it pretty much my entire career, and I know how busy they are, and the attention we're trying to get and the importance, the imperative of it is they need to pick their heads up and pay attention to the way the next generation is going to learn, is learning. It's here, it's now, and the way they can actually take advantage and leverage their existing talent using things like competency-based models, building curriculums, learning management systems. That's for the biggest firms, but also for the individuals inside those firms or even sole practitioners to take responsibility for your learning. There's so many different ways to do it now. It's not just come to a seminar and sit in a seat and have the learning pushed to you and the sage on the stage, but it's developing your own personal learning networks to develop your own careers. And so I think it's really exciting, and but it's not just about being really exciting. It's fundamentally changed, and we have to be letting CPAs know that and know the advantage they can get from engaging with it.
So, I mean, it's funny because we've kind of developed our own little mantra here, right, which is L greater than C squared. So the theory being winners in this rapid pace of change and complexity are going to be those who can keep their rate of learning greater than the rate of change, and that keep their rate of learning greater than their competition.
Right.
And it's funny because when we're starting our college visits now, so I just finished one down in Salisbury University, and the one thing that students write down, and they don't write down much when you talk to them, the one thing they write down is L greater than C squared. It's funny. It's like you watch them write it, and because they've never thought of it that way, most of them think I'm going to be done my college journey and I'm done. And I'm saying, no, you're actually not. It's going to get even worse because it's happening faster to you than it did to me, and you're going to have to kind of figure this stuff out. So it is interesting how all generations we have to kind of raise the flag that says this is different, I think, in this environment. And the good news is you've got more resources, right? Our blog, our Twitter, social learning, all those things that we've played around with are there. And you're leading us in the MACPA to help move into some of this area, right? So just tell us about some of the other, so you talked about Nano-Learning. What are some of the other things that we're doing, or what are some of the things that you would say, this is how we're approaching it?
Okay. So two things. One of the things we learned when we were at Harvard is the way people learn. I mean, this is just the truth of it. 70% of the way we learn is just like this, having a conversation at work or doing your work, that sort of in work mode, on the job kind of thing. 20% of it is deliberate sort of mentoring, coaching, one-on-one. Okay, now I'm going to teach you this, but still inside the workplace. So only 10% of the way we learn is formal learning. So it's only 10%. So how important is it? First of all, those other 70 and 20 inside a firm or company, you ought to be investing intentionally about those because there's big opportunity there. But in the 10% is where we can sort of, affect a change. So in that 10%, we're doing things like, and we've been doing this for years, the facilitated approach in learning. So instead of just the instructor on the stage, the instructor is giving case studies, they're asking questions, they're engaging, they're saying now, talk to the person next to you. And, we have a saying of, individual thinking and then make your thinking visible. Share. So back to the social learning, sharing what you're learning amplifies what you're learning. It doesn't just pass it on. It creates a conversation where the learning gets much richer and deeper. And that can be in person, or that can be, as you said, in social channels. So we talk a lot about, Twitter and LinkedIn and reading your favorite blog. If you can create your own personal learning network socially, decide what matters to you. Start following and filtering the people and the places that are important to you. And that's real learning, and that will be measured one day and recognized. I'm convinced of it. Right now it's not, but it will. Yeah. So I would say, doing those kinds of things. And then just in the online learning, the interactive badging, gamifications, the kind of things we're talking about trying to insert. And it just, and I was not, on the task force, we actually went through an exercise of, we had to take a MOOC. We had to participate in an online program that used badging. And like, oh, this is going to be really I just need to get through this so I'm ready for the next meeting. This is the one that was in Silicon Valley. I'm like, I just have to finish this. I'm sitting at my kitchen table and just doing the work, and all of a sudden it popped up that my friend who's on the task force with me, she just got a badge. I'm like, well, wait a minute. How did she get that badge? I want that badge. Oh, I got to finish this. Oh, and then somebody else has more points. All of a sudden, not only was I learning, but I was totally immersed in competing and walking away with a lot more than I would have if I'd have just finished that exercise, answered the questions, and checked the box. I think that's really how it's fundamentally changing.
Well, and I guess I would also say that learning's collaborative, right? I mean, the beauty is, the days of the instructor knowing everything are long gone. None of us know anything, even if you think you're an expert. So and I see this in our town halls, there isn't any question that can't come up that some member in that audience can't answer. I mean, we've had some really, right? And they raise up and like, I got the, So how, that's the beauty, right? We have to untap that in our organizations because there is the wisdom of the crowd idea. And learning's got to try to change to be able to address that, right? So I know we're using more interactive things like Conferences.io to get active participation, social Q&A. But tell us about, I know internally we've been experimenting with badging and this new thing called PLIP. Talk about that.
Personal learning in your pocket. So it's a Twitter-based, what would you call it, platform program? It's cloud-based. But really all it's doing is curating, filtering articles by subject matter into a place, into your personal learning in your pocket that you sign on. It pulls the feed in, and as you read it, it's tracking it. So it's not a badge, but we're adding badges, but you get, you feel as if you've accomplished something. So, for our own staff planning session, we created a personal learning in your section on staff planning and challenged our whole team to do pre-reading for our planning session. And I think it was the first time that everybody did the pre-reading. We had badges that we tried out. But I think it's the satisfaction of not only reading it, but seeing that's being tracked.
Right.
After you read it, it's a transcript, and it gives you a little graph, like this is how much you've read. So taking that outside of our own organization, as you think about it, another organization could use it. An individual could say, I want my manager to know that I just read up on whatever is important to you, right?
Yeah.
I want my manager to see that I'm developing myself. I'm taking responsibility for my own career. And the bounce model that we use talks about that first level. Before you hit manager, you're responsible. Develop yourself. Yes, your firm or your company is going to tell you things they want you to go to and those kinds of things, but take it beyond that. That's what I would say to any individual, but especially in that early career, take it beyond that and take responsibility for your career yourself. And then when you hit manager, all of a sudden you're responsible for other people, learning other people.
It's changing direction.
It's changing directions, and it's a whole new set of skills.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
And so that other set of skills, right? Talk about that.
So the first set of skills in our bounce model is all about the technical. It's sort of the, you got to get that under your belt. And mastery, yes. So it's all the technical things that are constantly changing. But once you hit manager, all of a sudden you're responsible and know how to manage people. And if all you've done is take the technical things your firm or your company needs you to know, and you haven't been explored, you have been using the leadership channel of PLIP to explore leadership, you're going to find yourself at a disadvantage. So take that responsibility, because the bounce that happens in your career that lead up to managing partner, CFO, whatever in your organization is going to require more of those strategic communication, leadership kind of skills. That's where the focus will be. Yeah. But start developing that for yourself early.
Great advice. And so we've affectionately, right, in our Business Learning Institute, we call them success skills.
Success skills.
Because they're the differentiator. It's so funny, and back to my college visit, there was a conversation about what skills do we need coming out of college. And it's funny, what we're hearing across the board from our employers, right, firms, companies, et cetera, is the kids, the graduates of accounting, aren't coming in prepared to do the work. So they don't know how to communicate well. They often don't have good written communication, presentations, making arguments about well-researched arguments. And those are things that sometimes we, you know, when I was in accounting, you didn't want to, I hated English. I hated doing all those things. And suddenly they're differentiators. So I think you're right. It's, and what you just said, which is interesting about taking charge of your own career, that's key, because we're seeing it all the time, that many people come into a firm, especially larger ones, where they pretty much you think they've got everything laid out. But they're not always giving you all those extra skills, and you've got to take some of that responsibility. So it hit me as you were talking about the percentages, right? So 10%. So if you think about that, in our profession, we require 40 hours of CPE a year to keep your license, 40 hours of learning. And by the way, Maryland has no requirement. So we believe all good learning as a professional is good learning based on what you need. So if you're a tax expert, you'll take tax. If you're an audit expert, but if you're a CFO, you might have a whole different set of stuff. But just go with me a minute. If your average work year without overtime is 2,000 hours, right? 40 hours times 50, then 10% is 200 hours.
Right.
So if you think about it, you know, we're not, as a profession, even though we're one of the few professions that requires continuing education to stay current, 40 hours isn't enough. No. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting, just thinking about that. So if you're not doing 200 hours, where's your other 160 coming from?
Right, right.
Right, other than on the job and the mentoring.
And I would say it's so much easier to get that other 200 now, you know? Oh. You can be on the treadmill at the gym, plugged in and listening to a podcast, or, you know, the 10-minute, we're going to have it, all our learning is going to be mobile. So, you know, you're standing and waiting for your prescription, or you're wherever you are, there's learning that can happen. And those success skills too are online. They're online, and they can be quickly. So even in your career, when your company's focusing you on that left side of the balance, all the technical stuff, go out there and do some things on your own to start developing those skills. And I think it is going to be a differentiator.
So talk a little bit more about competency. So clearly, as you think about the bounce, right, that is the beginning of thinking about what are the competencies, skills that I need as I'm an individual contributor, leading myself well. And then the turn, when I've got to now manage people, projects, and customers. Now, what's that like? But just give me any of your background that you're thinking about in terms of what's this competency thing mean. And
well, again, I'll talk about a firm and a company, and then I'll make it back to an individual. I think if a company can say, what are the competency, and we work with companies and firms all the time to do this, so we have frameworks we've developed, but it is looking at, so what are the like 5 things that are what are the 5 competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities that are really gonna be important at different parts of a career? So coming in, you know, what are they and how do they progress? So pretty much we keep finding the same thing, but they just have to get enhanced and developed. So there's ways of building curriculums of learning around these competencies that will provide the path. And that's another thing we hear from young professionals all the time is, okay, I'm here, I want to know what the path is, I want to know where it is. And competency frameworks can show them. And if they're augmenting all that with their own learning, those are the people that are going to accelerate their careers, but are also going to be the leaders in the firms. Yeah. They're the ones you need to pay attention to, that are going to be the succession plan.
Yep, right.
And that's a huge issue too.
Yeah. So so you think about all the big issues plaguing organizations today. They say it's leadership, it's talent development, it's succession planning, and it's generational, right? So all those kind of convergence of issues. The other one that hit me as you were talking is, we call it the smile curve, right? But it's the fact of, you know, Dan Burris would say a hard trend. It's demographic. So boomers are at this end. There's a lot of us, you and me, in the workplace, getting older. So we're going to have to retire at some point. At the bottom of the smile curve is Gen X, and that's the generation right after us. And then Gen Y, the millennials, are over here. And in fact, they say that this year, millennials will actually be the biggest generation in the workplace and surpass boomers for the first time. But the interesting point is it's somewhere around, it's almost a 1-to-2 ratio. In other words, 2 boomers leave, only 1 Xer is really available to replace them in a leadership role. Mm-hmm. So that means for a company to think about its succession planning, or a firm, they're going to have to fast track younger people in leadership roles in order to fill the void left by the big chunk of that curve retiring. And so your notion of competency-based curriculum, so I think we call it with the 4 C's. We like to say you've got to have the career path laid out, which is, so individual contributor, supervisor manager, senior manager, director, partner, CFO, that kind of thing, right? So 4 or 5, some 6 levels, but we kind of think about 5 generally when we think about it. So what's the career path to move up in your company or firm? What are the critical competencies, right? And then, like you said, you just create a big matrix, and now you've got these 5 levels, these 5 competencies. I might have to add specialties in terms of practice area or area of the firm or company, and then I just map, content into that, right? And then I've got my curriculum. So, and then at that stage, right, then I add what we like to say is you add cloud learning. So you need blended learning, right? You need a mixture of, I might have a big on-site impact meeting with a really inspirational leadership speaker, and then you go online and take your A&A update or your tax update or your corporate SEC reporting update. And that's how you can build out a pretty good curriculum, right? And then we work with the AI CPA and put it in a learning management system that allows you to track all of that in addition to your CPE requirements for your licensure, because that's the other criteria, right? I've got to track my compliance for licensure and all those kind of things. I guess it might be 5 C's when you throw that in. But anyhow, that's how we have to start managing learning in this new way. And that learning can be in those nano-learning chunks, like you said, or in person, or at a conference, or inside your firm or company. That's kind of what we're starting to see in the marketplace.
But I think the key is you have to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah.
You can't just let it be random. And that's kind of what we're used to doing. Like, oh gosh, it's time to renew my license. I better hurry up and get some things. You'll be at a disadvantage if you do that, because not only are you missing the opportunities that happened for the 2 years prior that you're rushing to take, you're missing all the great things that were out there, but you're also not developing your talent in the way that they want to be developed, and so will stay working for you, or that they will move your company forward because they're being developed in that really intentional, thoughtful way. It takes an investment. It takes investment of thought and time and money. Yeah, it's a different game. But the research we keep over and over again is that it makes a huge difference, and the rate of investment in learning, firms and companies are realizing it. We're seeing more and more of it, and they're tying their learning too, which I think is another critical point, to their strategic plan. Yeah. So if you're being random and it's not linked to where you want your firm or company to go, then what's the point? If you don't have a strategic plan, start there. Yeah. If you do, use that as the foundation for how you develop those competencies, the curriculum that are really going to tie everything together. And we're really excited that we're seeing more and more firms doing that. Yeah. And that gets right back to the succession plan. If you're building that now, to your point with the big change that's coming when we finally get to retire is you have the people behind you prepared and your company prepared, and you can leave a legacy. Yeah, you really can.
Well, and so what you're saying, all that stuff reinforces culture, and they're talking about the return on people, right? Return on culture, return on leadership. I mean, I almost think it's like that ROI now is like ROP, people, ROC, culture, and ROL, learning. If you do that well, and I love your point about you have to start with strategy. It's like starting with why. So what are we trying to do in our firm or company? What's important? What do we think the differentiating skills are? So we've talked to some firms about, like, we want to be known as experts. We want to be where everyone's a thought leader. All right, good. So that's how are you going to train them to do that? What's those skills look like? Or I want people that are really good client service people. Or in my finance area, I want people that are like the best of the best in terms of this kind of specialty area. So, or I want innovation. That's another hot one we're seeing a lot of times. So if you know that, then build your curriculum around those kind of objectives. So you're not just checking off the compliance boxes, which I think is dangerous in this environment, right? Which brings back another thing that we like to say, and I know it's our friend of ours, Reggie Henry, who likes to say this, but I like to say, if you're not willing to invest in this stuff, what's the return of not investing, right? So that's a big, kind of a big concept, because a lot of times people think if I make a spend on extra spending for training, then the difference between that extra spend and nothing is status quo. In other words, if I don't spend that money, it's more money in my pocket right now as a partner or right in my company. And that's going to be equal to zero as we go over time because I'm not spending any more money. Right. But I would argue that in a fast-changing environment, that zero might not be zero because if I don't spend that money in a year, actually competition might force me into losing money in other places because my people aren't trained properly.
Absolutely.
Is that?
Yeah. And then we hear firms say, well, what if I spend all this money training these people and they leave? And then we like to say, what if you don't and they stay? So there's a definite imperative to paying attention to that.
And then the other thing is it's all over the place, but training and development, career development, are one of the top 3 things that young professionals want. So it makes them want to stay, as you said earlier. It makes them want to stay in your firm or company. So there's what's the cost of losing people and turning them over? They say it's like a whole payroll. Every time you lose a person, it's like a year. So it's like another salary on top of what you have to replace. Right. So it's huge. So both the benefit of retention, the return on leadership, we've seen those numbers are amazing. Engagement increases if you care about them and develop them to their strengths and to their to a career path, right? And I think they said like trust goes up like 8 times, engagement goes up like 700%. There's a huge numbers, all wrapped around learning. Yeah. So so what else? So now as an individual CPA, what should I be thinking about?
So again, no matter what your place or your career, your age, or whatever, I think the opportunity is now to develop your learning and develop your personal network. So I would say get online, experiment, try online learning. Just start with LinkedIn. The profession seems to be really, really comfortable with LinkedIn. You're a LinkedIn influencer, so you publish on there. Following some of those influencers on LinkedIn, find what matters to you. Find the people in the profession or in, maybe you have a client niche that you serve. Go outside the profession and look at those niches and start listening. Start by listening and then start by contributing. So when you read a blog that might be written by some guru in whatever matters most to you, then make a comment, share. Twitter's the next step. Go on Twitter and start following someone that's important to your business or even your personal. I mean, learning, you enrich yourself, you're going to enrich your career, period. And comment. We've had some amazing results just by doing that. We've met some incredible people. So, an individual might say, well, I can't, I don't have time to meet people. You do. You do have time to meet people. And just by a simple retweet with an insight or a comment on a blog, all of a sudden you might actually hear from that person. So I would say start to develop that personal learning network and experiment. Try, we do these vision to strategy workshops, and we're doing some in the spring for our members. And they're a very different experience, and we've done a lot of them, and without exception, people walk away going, "Oh my gosh, I really had no idea what I was coming into," but it's life-changing, some folks will say. But it's not the same comfortable experience that you're used to having, sitting in the back row of the seminar reading your newspaper. It is collaborative, it is engaging, it is it's a facilitated experience, not a pushed learning. It's asking you to consider questions. What do those questions mean to you? And then sharing those insights with the people at your table and then the big group. I mean, it's an amazing experience. So look to get uncomfortable in your learning, I would say. Step outside, whether it's trying something like Twitter or coming to one of our workshops that's more of the facilitated experience.
Awesome. Well, Jackie, thank you very much for talking about the future of learning and CPAs.
I love talking about it. Thank you.